Hello and welcome to LaExcellence Hyderabad and Bengaluru. This is the daily news analysis for 21st May 2020. The admissions for the online live general studies prelims cum mains batch 2021 have started. Please direct your queries to the numbers given below. As usual, we will discuss the articles under Deep and TNA. The former consist of the editorial articles that have been published in the newspaper, whereas the latter consist of the important other articles in the newspaper. So the title for the first article of our discussion is Grasping the Defense Self-Reliance Nepal. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to defense reforms and the dimension is related to the creation of an indigenous manufacturing ecosystem. As we all know, in order to handle the economic situation at the moment, the government or the Prime Minister has launched the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, basically aiming at self-reliance. So this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan has several steps under it. We call them as components or tranches. We have first tranche, second tranche, third tranche, fourth tranche and so on. These are basically the phases in which the reforms are being given to the economy as such. Now, if you look at the kind of economic reforms that we are trying to bring, on one hand, there is basically some amount of capital infusion. The government has given out some money, is trying to give out some money, especially to NBFCs, MSMEs and so on. That is one part of the game. The other part of the game in which the reforms work is to bring in structural reforms. So instead of giving out money to certain sectors, the government is basically bringing in certain systemic reforms in these sectors so that these sectors will thrive in the long run and create a lot of economic activity for themselves. So several steps have been announced as a part of the regulatory reforms and a change in regulatory reforms. One is the FDI limit has been increased, and the second point is the Ordnance Factory Board is going to be corporatized by bringing in corporate elements or market principles into the Ordnance Factory Board. We are basically trying to improve the functioning of these bodies so that there will be more defense production, and then we are trying to streamline procurement process and so on and so forth. So what is the main aim of this kind of steps that we are taking? So we want to address the long-standing strategic and national security concerns. So that is what we are trying to address with the help of these reforms that we have brought out. Like for example, what are the strategic concerns? One of the concern is that India is heavily dependent on the external world for its defense imports. Like for example, Saudi Arabia is the world's largest importer of defense weapons, whereas India is the world's second largest importer of the weapons. In fact, at one point of time, India used to be the largest importer of the weapons. So if you want to basically be secure nationally, if your national security has to be protected, you have to make sure that you create some indigenous weapons. Some creation of indigenous strong weapons is required in order to have a very strong and secure country. Otherwise, what happens is, if you are dependent on the external world, like for example, you are dependent on US for a particular defense unit, okay, for a particular missile, maybe you're dependent on USA, and now you are basically going to fight a war against some country, and if USA does not like it, it is not going to give you that machine, right? And in such a situation, you will not be able to fight your war because you don't have your ammunition, you don't have your missile and so on. So in order to prevent such a situation, we want to create all kinds of weapons, all kinds of good weapons that are required to protect ourselves. That is the main aim of this particular set of reforms that have been launched by the Prime Minister. We want to address the vulnerabilities that are there in the defense manufacturing sector. So because of COVID-19, all the supply chains have been disrupted. Like for example, in the previous news analysis, we've talked about how the supply chain of farmer has been disrupted. Like for example, even if the farmer has harvested his crop, because of COVID lockdown restrictions, he was not able to move his produce from the point of harvest to the point of consumption. This created a lot of problem for him. Now, analogous to this, we also faced several problems in our defense forefront. Like for example, we had to import a lot of defense equipment. We were also importing spare parts. We were also importing technology. And because of the supply chain restrictions, all these were stopped, and this has created some amount of dent on our national security. And we do not want this kind of situation, which is why we are coming up with certain radical steps. So one of the radical steps is that we have decided to notify a list of weapons. Certain weapon systems are basically being notified and identified. Having identified them, the government has said that these will be totally manufactured in India and all their imports will be banned. So these list of weapons which have been identified, which will be identified by the government, will be sourced entirely from Indian manufacturers. That is one good thing that we are doing. And the second thing which the government has promised is that it promised the people of the country, it promised the defense manufacturers inside the country that it is going to expand this list of weapon system. So it has said, look, at the moment we will identify certain weapons and only you and you alone can manufacture these in the country. These can be manufactured just inside the country. And progressively over a period of time, I am going to increase this list by providing you with more opportunity to produce. So what is this effectively doing? This is effectively luring the domestic manufacturers to create indigenous weapon system, right? In addition to this, what else have we created on the defense forefront which is going to support the reforms that are basically being created at the moment? We have created the Chief of Defense Staff. We have also come up with a very new and novel Defense Procurement Procedure 2020. So you have also created an enabling environment. Like for example, at the moment you are saying you have come up with certain reforms. In order to support these reforms, you also have the supporting infrastructure like the Defense Procurement Procedure 2020 and the Chief of Defense Staff. Now, how are these supporting structures going to help? Like for example, DPP 2020, Defense Procurement Procedure 2020 has offset clauses. Like for example, when investment comes into India, 30% or 40% of it, 40% of the equipment that is being manufactured, that has to be sourced from India. That is one way Defense Procurement Procedure 2020 would help. Next, the Defense Procurement Procedure also has this concept of strategic partnership model. So what is the strategic partnership model? Strategic partnership model is a system in which we basically give out long-term contracts to the defense manufacturers. Let's say you have Reliance, which is a domestic company, right? So the government basically gives a long-term contract of 25 to 30 years to this particular Reliance industry, maybe for the manufacture of something like submarines or other kinds of weapons system. Okay, by creating such long-term contracts with indigenous manufacturers, firstly we are building trust, secondly we are providing them with a constant source of income. If the project is for 25 to 30 years, you are basically giving them a constant source of income, right? So in such a way, you are basically creating new domestic manufacturers in the country. Like for example, Reliance is a big player. It will start participating in the strategic partnership model, and looking at Reliance and having some faith, maybe other companies, other defense companies in the country will start moving forward and creating and start engaging in this strategic partnership model. So this is also going to help. And how is CDS or the Chief of Defense Staff going to help? Chief of Defense Staff will examine all the steps that are being taken from a tri-service angle. Because he has a full-fledged set of knowledge about all the three services that are there, and then he will be able to see if the steps or the reforms that are taken, are they leading to any duplication of work? Are they leading to any duplication of effort? Are they leading to bias to any particular service? And he can prevent all these things so that the defense and the security system in the country will develop properly between the three services, which are Army, Navy and the Air Force. So this is how we are doing it. In addition to it, we have said that we are going to support the private defense manufacturers, their research capacities and so on. In addition to this, previously in the past 5 years, we have been trying to improve the defense manufacturing at a national level, at a domestic level. In fact, we have sanctioned about how many? About 200 projects, 200 defense projects within the country only. But none of them have moved forward to a large extent. Now we will take the opportunity as a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan to revisit these 200 projects that have been sanctioned and see where there are loopholes, and then remove those loopholes so that defense manufacturing will start as soon as possible. This is another step that we are going to take. In addition to this, what else is being done? Ordnance Factory Board is basically being corporatized. And how are we doing? Some of the components of the Ordnance Factory Board is going to be public listed, for which there is some amount of corporate element that is infused. That is how you are infusing market principles into your government body of ordnance factory boards, and this will increase the production of ammunition and defense equipment from these bodies as such. In addition to this, some of the other important steps that have been taken are, firstly, we have to create an indigenous ecosystem in which the repair, maintenance and overhaul of the imported weapons is being done. Like for example, you have imported a missile from Russia, and then if it's not sufficient to, if you just import the missile, right? So if there is a repair, you should also be able to do it yourself instead of calling Russian personnel every time you have a problem. That kind of capacity also has to be developed in domestically. That is what something we are trying to do. In addition to this, we are also trying to make sure that there are joint ventures that are formed. Like for example, we have increased the FDI limit from 49% to 74%. The hope is that more joint ventures will be formed between domestic countries and the countries outside, so that we will be able to manufacture more weapons. So these are all the steps that have been taken by this government under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Now we will move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is How Public Health Boosts an Economy. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the investments in public health, and the dimension is related to the correlation between investment in public health and the economy. As we all know, the government has launched a 20 lakh crore economic package that has been announced recently, and the proposals under this economic package was mainly to achieve self-reliance. But in addition to this, it was also mainly to prevent any kind of future pandemics and also to respond to any kind of such public health emergencies. Now, we are trying to improve the situation of our health infrastructure by saying that we will improve the health and wellness centers. That is the first point. And secondly, we will create a separate hospital block for infectious diseases. In all districts, these blocks will be created, is what the government is saying. In addition to this, laboratory network will be expanded in the country under the guidance of the Indian Council of Medical Research, and then we are going to create more avenues of research for zoonotic diseases. So these were certain steps that have been launched under the economics reform package of 20 lakh crore, and we are trying to basically give out these steps so that we will be able to fight any future pandemic, right? Now what this article says is that whatever response has been given under the 20 lakh crore package, the outlays that have been given for health or the measures that have been put under the health heading, health subheading as such, these measures are highly inadequate. In fact, this article claims that this is a very limited response to the threat of infectious outbreaks. So this is one of the modern day scourges. In fact, this is one of the problems that the mankind is facing at the moment, which is a very big problem, that is COVID. But in times to come, as World Health Organization is pointing out, as United Nations health sub bodies are pointing out, there is a possibility that such diseases will come in large numbers. And we want to be ready for these diseases as and when they come. So what is required is adequate investment in the health system so that we will be able to tackle any kind of public health emergencies in future. Now the 15th Finance Commission is trying to examine ways to increase the public financing in the health sector. So what are the ways in which we can increase the investment in health sector? What are the ways in which we can boost the spending of health is what 15th Finance Commission is trying to do. In fact, it is trying to work out ways in which it can give more money to the states, because the states are the bodies which have the primary role in creating a strong health system, right? So in order to make or empower the states, in order to create such a robust healthcare system, the 15th Finance Commission is basically trying to tweak its allocations in such a way that health will be a major point of focus of states. Now the point is, this article basically says that the modern day thinking is that investment in health is not so good. When an economy increases in terms of its GDP, in terms of its growth, in terms of investment and so on, what economists of the modern day think is that when the government spends too much money on the healthcare sector, this does not give good returns, which is why economists like William Baumol has described healthcare as a cost disease. He calls it as a cost disease because the costs increase at a very big price, and the returns from this investment is basically very low. So what I'm trying to tell you is, economists of the modern time, like these days, especially in the last 1 or 2 decades, think that the spending on health is not so important as and when compared to the spending in the economic activities. Now, this article moves forward and claims that this is not the case. It tells us certain examples. It tells us that the United Kingdom after World War II invested in health. Similarly, when you have Japan, when you take the example of Japan in the 1960s, in the 1930s, it also invested in a lot of public spending in health. And if you take the case of Asian financial crisis of 1990, which plagued the Southeast Asian economies, they also started spending more money after the crisis. So what this article points out is that there are certain crises that have plagued certain economies, and at that point, at those junctures, these economies have invested largely in health. And the reason why they did so is because it will create a relatively young and healthy population in future, in the next 2 or 3 decades, and that population will be able to increase the GDP of that particular economy. So investing in health is not a stupid step. Investing in health is not a cost disease, but it is a very efficient way of increasing the economic activity, is what this article is trying to tell us. In fact, it is really important for India, because India has a relatively young population at this point of time. If you take the average age of an Indian, it is quite less, and it is close to 30 years, right? It is quite less. In fact, it is less than 30 years, about 29.4 years. Now, if you have a relatively young population and you invest more in their health, these population will be able to work for the next 30 to 40 years until they become 70 years of age. And then they will be, in these 30 to 40 years, probably they will be able to contribute a lot to the economy. That is why we are supposed to improve the health systems in the economy, is what this article is trying to tell us. In addition to this, if you have a very strong healthcare system, like for example, let's say we create a health system which is so famous that everybody in the world says, yes, Indian healthcare system is really good, Indian doctors are really good. Once that branding is done, when there is a pandemic like situation in the future, we will be able to send out our expertise, we will be able to send out our doctors, and this is going to earn export earnings as well. This is also going to earn goodwill. So we will also be able to take care of the world and not just of the Indian country as such. That is an added advantage of having a very strong healthcare workforce. So this article basically creates a strong case for spending a lot in the healthcare sector of the country, and especially public healthcare sector. Now let's move on to the next article. The title for the next article is A Hole in the Hole. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the dimension is the effect of COVID-19 on other healthcare services. So the lockdown that was announced, it was basically originally conceived or originally assumed that it would act as a stop-gap arrangement so that the nations will be able to handle the crisis. So by using this lockdown, nations will be able to flatten the curve of the COVID-19, and then they will be able to tide over the crisis of the COVID-19. But as days passed by, we have realized that we have moved from the lockdown phase to a phase in which there is a paralysis of general healthcare. Like for example, the number of cases have not decreased, first thing, and the number of cases are still increasing, and they are going to increase to a large extent in the future as well. And this is going to burden the healthcare sector, especially the public healthcare. Like for example, at the moment we have very sparse healthcare resources. If you look at the amount and the density of the community healthcare centers or primary healthcare centers or the tertiary healthcare centers, whatever they are very sparse. The number of such healthcare centers we have, public healthcare centers we have per square kilometer is quite less. And in fact, if you want them to go to the private hospitals, that is not possible either, because private hospitals are very costly. In such a situation, it is very important for us to balance the different requirements of the healthcare. We have to balance the different requirements of healthcare, be it private healthcare, be it public healthcare, be it the insurance sector, be it the diagnostics services, and so on. Now, this article basically gives out certain amount of data in relation to National Health Mission, and it basically tells us the different different problems people were facing in the health front because of COVID-19 lockdown. So, the first problem which people started facing was that because of COVID-19, they could not go to the hospitals, and even if they had emergency conditions, like for example, if you have kidney stone problem or if you have a gastric trouble, of course this might not kill you instantly, but it is going to cause a lot of pain, right? Lot of pain and lot of trauma. And even in such situations, you were not able to go to the hospital because of the transportation restrictions as such. Okay, so this created a lot of problem for the patients as such. In addition to this, if you look at the immunization coverage, if you look at the institutional deliveries that we have in the country, both of these have come down. Because if you want to immunize your child, if you want to get a vaccine shot for your child, then you have to go to the hospital, and people are not doing so at this point of time because of COVID-19 crisis. Also, people are feeling that it is better to have a delivery at home with the help of a midwife instead of going for an institutional delivery. So we have less institutional deliveries, especially during the COVID time. Also, there is a dearth or shortage of life-saving drugs to people suffering from HIV and tuberculosis. So these people were put on sidelines because excessive focus was given to the COVID-19 patients. Of course, COVID-19 is a very big disease. COVID-19 is hurting a lot of people. It is taking away lives. But there are other patients also who are equally chronically ill. Like for example, if there is a HIV patient, if there is a TB patient who is at the terminal stage, these patients require care too, right? But these patients were not able to get adequate care because the health system was pressurized as such to focus more on COVID maintenance and COVID containment. So in addition to this, we've also not been able to handle the chronic conditions that we have in the country, be it diabetes, be it high pressure, paralysis, strokes, and so on. People who having these chronic conditions also have faced certain amount of trouble in accessing the healthcare because of the lack of infrastructure, as in transportation infrastructures. And even when they went to the hospital, they were not able to access the healthcare as such because the hospitals were overburdened at this point of time. So this is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is Nepal's new political map is unacceptable to India, says India. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to India-Nepal relations, and the dimension is related to the boundary disputes between India and Nepal. So to start with, if you look at the India-Nepal map, India and Nepal basically share two trijunctions, and one of these trijunctions is present in Lipu Lake in Kalapani. Now the problem is the Kalapani is basically a border that we have, and India also claims this area. So does Nepal. India says that Kalapani is basically an essential part of Uttarakhand, whereas Nepal says Kalapani is basically part of southern Nepal. So was there a treaty in history which basically tried to demarcate whether Kalapani belonged to India or Nepal? Yes, you have the Treaty of Sagoli, which was signed in 1816, but it was not very clear on where Kalapani stood. So Kalapani, whether it belongs to India or Nepal, was not clearly demarcated by this particular treaty of Sagoli, and this treaty was very old as such. Now this is the main point of contention at this point of time, and both the countries are producing maps in such a way that they are claiming Kalapani. Now what happened was, in recent times, Nepal has basically given out an official map. An official map of Nepal has been launched, and in this official map you see that Kalapani and other areas like Lipu Lake and Limpia, Dhura, etc., which are the surrounding areas of Kalapani, all these are basically have been claimed by Nepal. Nepal is saying that it is a part of its sovereign territory. Now looking at this new official map, India is basically flabbergasted. So India has basically said that this is unacceptable to India, and this kind of claiming of territory is artificial, is what it has said. It is argued that the act of representing implementation by Nepal of these places is unilateral. Nepal is basically trying to claim these areas without proper dialogue or negotiation or resolution of disputes. And all these three elements, namely resolution of disputes, dialogue and negotiations, is very important to solve any border issue. So this is what is the way forward. India is looking forward for a dialogue and negotiation because India clearly and from the bottom of its conscience feels that it is a part of its territory. So does Nepal, and in such a situation they have to create an amicable dispute resolution mechanism, amicable border dispute resolution mechanism which can solve the problem. So this is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. The title for the next article is Cabinet OK's NBFC Liquidity Plan. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the non-performing assets and the dimension is related to the measures that have been taken to address the stressed assets problem in the non-banking sector. So the exact terminology of the article is not so important for the exam, but we need a very good and comprehensive background about NBFCs as such, because questions repeatedly come on NBFCs and other banking entities, especially in prelims. So the legality of NBFCs was established by 1956. Now NBFCs is not a bank as such. It is basically a non-banking but a financial company. So it undertakes some steps which are taken by the banks and some steps which are not usually taken by the banks. So it basically engages in several activities by doing business of loans and advances. It also looks into the shares, stocks, bonds and debentures and so on. It also involves itself in insurance business and chit business. Like I have said, this is not a bank as such because banks do not solely focus on insurance business and chit businesses. But NBFCs look into chits. They can have chit businesses. They are chit fund companies which are NBFCs, and then you also have insurance companies which are NBFCs. You also have mutual fund companies. They also come under NBFCs. So these are basically the different activities that an NBFC can engage in, and the legality of NBFC is established by the Companies Act 1956. Now there are certain exceptions. There are certain exceptions in which NBFCs cannot participate because this might create to some kind of volatility, some kind of problem for the economy as such, which is why certain sectors have been exempted from the functioning of NBFCs in these sectors. Like for example, you have agriculture sector, industrial activity, and the purchase or sale of any goods or providing any services and so on. So these are certain other important points that have been listed in the background. So NBFCs, can they participate in each and every activity in the economy? No. So if this is a prelims option, you know what you should mark. Now how is NBFC strictly different from a bank? Like for example, banks are basically regulated by what? We all know that the banks are regulated by RBI. And how does RBI basically regulate bank? By the usage of the Banking Regulation Act. The year is 1949. Keep this in mind. So the RBI regulates the banks, whereas the NBFCs are regulated by Companies Act. As pointed out, NBFCs are basically set up by these Companies Act of 1956. So NBFCs are regulated by the Companies Act. Now NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. What are demand deposits? Basically current accounts and savings accounts. Keep this in mind. Demand deposits basically include current accounts and savings accounts, and fixed deposit FD and RD is basically time deposits. You have to keep this in mind. Now NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. This is another important factor that is important for your prelims. So with this brief background, we will jump into the article. We've understood what an NBFC is. So the Union Cabinet has basically approved a special liquidity scheme for NBFCs and housing finance companies. So even before COVID-19 pandemic, we had several NBFC crises, housing finance company crisis and other mutual fund crisis. In order to handle the situation, the economic survey at that point of time, as in for this particular year, has given out certain measures to handle this NBFC crisis. Now, but because COVID-19 has come and sat on top of us, the economy is reeling under a lot of pressure, especially the NBFCs. And these NBFCs do not have enough money. So the Union Cabinet, as a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, has launched a special liquidity scheme which would provide and infuse money to the NBFCs and the housing finance companies. Now, a special purpose vehicle will be set up by the public sector bank to manage the stressed asset fund. Now, this stressed asset fund will issue certain securities which are guaranteed by the government of India. Now, this securities will be able to raise the money worth of 30,000 crores, and this 30,000 crores will be infused into the NBFCs and the housing finance companies, which they can use to revive their economic activity. Now, that is what this article says. Now, let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is New Scheme for the Chhattisgarh Farmers. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyay Yojana. These government schemes are important for your prelims, so please look into this article carefully. The dimension is related to the measures to increase the income of the farmers. So before we jump into this article, we need to have a brief background about minimum support prices as such. So what are these minimum support prices? So every year farmers basically plant their crops. If it is a multi-cropping land, they basically plant their crops maybe multiple times in a year. So whatever is planted, it will get harvested over a period of time. Now this produce which has been harvested by the farmer, it has to get certain adequate price. Otherwise it will be difficult for the farmer to live his life, right? So when he creates a produce, when he creates maybe a few quintals of rice, he needs to get adequate price for this produce that he has created. So minimum support price is a method which ensures that the farmer gets that minimum amount of price for that particular product, for that particular crop. Now the question is, who gives out this minimum support price and how do we decide on this minimum support price? These are the two questions that evolve in our mind. Now, who gives out this minimum support price? This is given by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Reforms, and it is based on the recommendations that have been given by CACP, or the Cabinet Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. Now, with the recommendations of this particular CACP, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs is going to decide on what the minimum support price is going to be. You have to keep that in mind. Now, how many crops do we provide minimum support price for? We provide minimum support price from 23 to 26 crops. Between 23 to 26 crops, we provide minimum support price. These make sure that the farmer gets adequate price discovery, the farmer gets adequate disposable income in his hand, so that he will have some money left to take care of his family. He will have some money left to probably invest in the next cropping cycle. He will have some money left to save. Okay, for all these activities, you have to ensure that the farmer gets some money to ensure his livelihood and dignity, right? For which we provide this minimum support price, and we've talked about who gives out this minimum support price. Now, there are different ways in which you can calculate these minimum support prices. One of them is A2 method, the other is the A2 plus FL method, and the other is the C2 method. Now, when you calculate the minimum support price, you basically take into account several factors. Like, for example, you look at the price volatility, which is one factor that you see, and the second thing you basically look at is the interstate variation, and so on. If you look at the different factors that have been taken by the CEACP, you have basically about 5, 6, in fact you have more than 10 factors. By taking into account all these factors, CEACP arrives at a figure which we call it as MSP, or minimum support price, for a particular crop. Like this, the minimum support price is given from 23 to 26 crops. Now, the factors that we have, those are basically what deciding A2 plus FL and C2. Like, for example, A2 includes the expenditure the farmer has to bear on fertilizers, hired laborers, and leased land, and so on. For all these factors, the farmer has to give out some money. Now, if this is taken into account to calculate the minimum support price that has to be given to the farmer, it becomes the A2 cost. Now, moving one step forward, the government, the CACP, has also evolved another method called the A2 plus FL method, in which you also take into account the family labor that is there. This concept of family labor is not present in the A2 method. In A2 method, you have hired laborers, but family labor is not counted, and family labor is counted in A2 plus FL. So, which of these two things is more comprehensive? Is it A2 or A2 plus FL? So, the answer is definitely A2 plus FL. Now, moving forward, if you want to become more egalitarian, if you want to become more accommodative and take into account every other cost that is bore by the farmer, that is bared by the farmer, then you move for the C2 cost. And the C2 cost is the most comprehensive cost, which includes the rent of the owned land and the interest on owned capital. So there are several factors which go into the calculation of MSP, and of these several factors that are there, C2 basically gives the most comprehensive cost, and using this we will be able to create the best MSP. But what is the government following at the moment? The government is following A2 plus FL, but there is a committee called the Committee on Farmers, which we call as the MS Swaminathan Committee. MS Swaminathan Committee wanted to go for C2 method, but the government is currently following the A2 plus FL method. Anyway, so this is the brief background about minimum support price. So what does this article say? The article says that Chhattisgarh is about to launch a new scheme called the Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyay Yojana in its state. So its main aim is to encourage farmers to produce more crops and help them get the right price for it. So a financial assistance will be given to the farmers. So how much financial assistance or money will be given to the farmer? About 10,000 rupees per acre will be given to the farmer. Depending upon the crop, the money that is given also varies from 10,000 to something else, and if it is a sugarcane crop, as high as 13,000 rupees per acre will be given. So why is this money being given? This money is being given to the farmer so that the farmer will be able to produce the crop without going to distress. So because at every crop cycle, before the crop cycle starts, he has to gather money and invest this money to buy seeds, fertilizers, hired labor, and so on. And this basically distresses the farmer. To prevent this kind of distress, Chhattisgarh government is basically coming up with Rajiv Gandhi Kisan Nyay Yojana, which is a financial assistance scheme. This is a financial assistance scheme which gives out money per acre for the farmer. So there are several other schemes like this in different states as well. For example, you have Kalya in Odisha, you have Bhavantar Bharpai Yojana in Haryana and Punjab, I suppose, and you have Bhavantar Bhugtan Yojana in Madhya Pradesh. So there are other price deficiency payment schemes and other price support schemes. So this is an income support scheme or a financial assistance scheme which is given to the farmer to support himself. Now this is what this article says. So these are the MCQs for the day. I want you to try these MCQs and put the answers in the comment section. I will put the answers as well after a period of time so that you will be able to match your answers. Now this completes our discussion. Thank you for your participation. We'll meet again.